This is the codex for the Leagues of Votann, which contains an interesting paragraph. The guns wielded by the kin bear superficial resemblance to that of the Imperium, but are superior in almost every way. So why not give a Space Marine these superior weapons? Now I was gonna make one such Space Marine, but as there is a new kill team of Death Watch out, it felt like the perfect match. Unfortunately, I didn't have their shoulder pads, so instead I thought, why not make them as the first chapter of Space Marines, the Unforgiven. And the first member of this team will be a heavy unit, wielding a weapon by the Brokier Thunderkin. However, as these weapons are being held by these exoskeleton hands, I was gonna have to get rid of them entirely, which left me in a little bit of a predicament, as I didn't know how to attach a second hand, so instead, I thought this guy would be wielding it one-handed. This was going to be the simplest solution out of all of the 5 units, however, it was going to be incredibly effective. And unlike the kin, he can easily grab it underneath the barrel, handling it without any problems. Now, as he was going to be the Bombard of my group, I had to give him some additional equipment, starting with some pouches and then giving them the extra lasers that I had from one of my leftover Terminators. And as we recently found out from the new Total War 40k game, this pose really is one of the deadliest weapons. Now, the arm holding the weapon wasn't exactly made for it, so I had to make a little bit of an adjustment so that the pose of it looks like he's holding a heavy weapon rather than an empty hand giving the command to hold. Personally, I see it like he just swung the weapon to his side to point towards something in the distance. Now, the veteran in Gravis armor also has this very distinct looking large scanner that is placed onto his power pack. Fortunately, I have a bunch of them left over from the Desolation squad, and it was going to be the perfect match. The only thing I chose to do different is place it in the center rather than the left, because I think it works a little bit better with such a massive scanner. Now, for the head, I really wanted to do something special, and he's not going to be helmetless. In fact, I'll be fixing one of the biggest issues I have with Gravis armor, which is that they technically had the perfect solution with the Inceptor kit, but they never reproduced those helmets on any of the other units, and I truly think this gives them a unique appearance and matches the theme of wearing extra heavy armor. Now, despite being satisfied with the pose of this arm, I was really not enjoying the fact that half of it was technically missing, so I decided to solve this issue by using a little jousting shield. And then I finished it off with giving him a few extra purity seals, because the Bombard is gonna need all the protection it can get. Now, jumping to the antithesis of Gravis armor, we have the Scout, that is going to be wielding a massive power fist that I really wanted to use for quite some time. It's also somehow the correct size for a Primaris Scout, which brings me to my suspicion that the Votann might have accidentally or purposefully mixed in some orangutan DNA into the kin. Now, this guy is meant to be a Headtaker, which is technically a Phobos with 2 knives, so even with me using slightly different weapons, I made sure that the knives were easily visible. And then the more I looked at his pose, the more he kept reminding me of something. Fortunately, the Canadian winters have been incredibly generous, and this year's harvest was looking fantastic. Now, I picked the box before the sprue had time to fully grow, however, this was gonna suffice. I had entirely forgotten that my rotary tool came with a very nice drill bit. I never really thought about using it, let alone for battle damage, but this was way better than usual. Now, for this weapon is where things were gonna get a little bit complicated. Now, using a pre-existing arm like this would have been very easy, however, I only have one of these. So I opted in to use the extra intercessor arms that I have a bunch of, and my solution was to cut away the gun, leaving only the hand that's holding the handle and the trigger. Then I removed all of the matching parts from the Votann weapon, trying not to damage the frontal part. Now, after connecting them, I can use the second arm that used to hold the bolter to essentially replace the arm of the kin. This way, the connection on the Primaris shoulders will be absolutely flawless. Then I repeated the process again to make several different guns before settling on the plasma, and then I started drilling out a pretty massive hole to the point that it was making out so much plastic I couldn't really see what was going on, so I had to use an airbrush to blow away the plastic. However, this must be the best hole I've ever made in a gun. And for the moment of truth, the arms went on perfectly. I did give him one of the proper shoulder pads, but then for the next one, I just went for the simpler Space Marine one. As I was making a Dark Angel, I did go for the knightliest head I could find. Then I thought it'd be quite appropriate to also give him a jousting shield, as the Primarch Lionel Johnson technically has the Emperor's jousting shield, which he now wields in his hands. Then I also included one of these scanners on his power pack, as it seems to be pretty common for this kill team. There was also quite a noticeable inconsistency that there was a lot of battle damage on his leg, however there was absolutely nothing on the jousting shield or the shoulder pads, as I ended up attaching them afterwards, so I made sure to give him some appropriate battle damage to make him look like he walked through a literal bullet storm, showing he has faith in the Emperor and the faith in the fact that the armor is gonna work. Additionally, I also quickly put together a Disruptor, using one of the extra arms I ended up making for the previous one, but I attached a muzzle from the bolter, extending its length just a little bit more. Then of course, the very notable but very experimental shoulder cape, which has the same properties as the Eliminator Camo cloaks. And the last member of the squad is going to be the leader, who's technically an Aegis, with a robotic arm wielding a powerful axe of a Votann leader. Initially, I did think this was going to be quite an easy process, as all I had to do was detach the part connecting to the arm, send it out to a nice smooth surface, and then connect the handle from the other side. However, the second I attempted that, it was clear that the connection was far too fragile and I was gonna have to come up with another idea. My solution was to drill out the hole and drive a metal pin through the 3 pieces. Now, I purposefully made it that small. The circumference of the pin and the lower handle were essentially the same, so I had to settle for a very small guide hole. And in case he quickly needs to pull out a bolter, this Votann equivalent is going to be hanging off his shield, ready for action. Now, primary reason that I ended up giving him so much extra equipment is that I really wanted him to read as the leader of the squad and have that menacing presence of an elite unit, despite simply being the Aegis of the squad. Which, looking back, I honestly think it was just my bias for the fact that in World of Warcraft, usually the tanks are the leaders of the raid. And with the Tamiya cement finally dry and the plastic settled, I was able to attach the arm, and surprisingly, it was actually holding down pretty well, and my Aegis was ready. Now, as previously, I've never collected Dark Angels, I wasn't exactly familiar with their chapter color scheme. For starters, their chapter divides into 3 primary color scheme, which is of course the classic Dark Angels green, there's the Deathwing cream, and of course the Ravenwing black. However, what counts as Deathwing, what counts as Ravenwing, and what counts as just a Dark Angel in a specific color scheme varies drastically. Even when referencing official Games Workshop artworks, I was seeing different answers. Who is Deathwing and who is not? It's the first company, it was originally meant to be just Terminators, but now it's the Blade Guard, now it's sometimes Gravis, sometimes it's not. So of course, I decided to just keep it incredibly simple and settle on the green. However, that was not going to be simple whatsoever, because right away I noticed that my green was entirely wrong to what I was trying to achieve. I tried using a pure black wash to try and darken it, but it didn't achieve the result I was looking for. So instead, I made a wash from Militarum green, Grim black, and a bit of flow improver. Using a very thick version of this essentially contrast wash, I did go in quite heavy. Because my highlights were incredibly bright, I felt quite confident that I was still going to have a very nice gradient, but this time, my green was going to look exactly as I was trying to achieve. I filled in some of the battle damage with a little bit of black paint, primarily so I don't actually lose track of it. Then, when I got started on the gold, I began to notice that it was a little bit too bright and it was overpowering the rest of the miniature. So I had to darken it down. Considering the heavy battle damage of the armor itself, it didn't really make much sense that the trim and everything else would be in such a clean and pristine condition. Moving on to the green, trying to get the correct color was a little bit more difficult than I initially anticipated, because trying to keep the color scheme relatively dark while also going into the saturation area was a very difficult balance to pull off. In my best attempt to highlight the armor, I was making a very common mistake that I do with dark armor, and instead I go too much into the dark areas and I don't leave enough of that very interesting gradient that transitions from the dark to the light. To try and correct this, I essentially grabbed some of the darkest green by mixing it with quite a bit of black and then applying it as almost this very thin glaze over all of the armor panels, and this finally brought back the armor to the idea of the color scheme that this is a dark forest, but it does have those areas where the light is shining through. For the tabard, I did mix up this very nice looking cream color by essentially combining a little bit of yellow and a little bit of brown, then using a bit of black and white to essentially desaturate the color and then bring back the brightness. Then for the highlight, I went for something a little bit more desaturated. Then for all the metallic areas, I went for gunmetal gray. However, following the exact same idea as I did with my gold, I wanted to make sure that I brought them down in brightness by using a wash afterwards. And then I noticed something interesting, which is that when applying my metallics, when using a synthetic brush, I had a much better result. When I was painting earlier, I used a natural hair brush and I thought there was something wrong with the metallic paint. Turns out, this was the difference. Now, as quite a few of them had their helmets on, I was able to do my favorite red lens effect by using a crimson ink and just doing a little white dot afterwards. As I had so many different units, I actually ended up playing quite a bit with several different OSL effects, including something for the base. And then I fell for the classical trap that is Games Workshop artwork, which is that when I saw that beautiful axe that the Votann was holding, it looked easy enough that I could do it myself. And this was a big mistake, because I ended up repainting this axe at least 2 or 3 times to the point that I lost most of the footage of me actually painting it all those times. In my original attempt, I tried going in with some contrast paints and inks over white, and that actually produced the worst result. In the end, I just had to manually glaze all the different colors, and I think it didn't turn out that bad. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this, and let's meet the unforgiving.